Looking for your next job but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've started and you're tired of responding to job postings only to hear, well, nothing. Welcome to part 1 of How to Find a Job, Timeless Advice for Uncertain Times. Here are your hosts, longtime friends and recruiting industry veterans Mike McSally and Andy Hilger.
All right. Welcome to a limited series podcast we're calling How to Find a Job. I'm here with Mike McSally, and as you might have guessed, we are going to be talking about how you can find a job. So first, Mike, thanks for doing this with me.
Yeah, buddy. Good to see you. Look forward to it.
Yeah, it should be fun. I think you and I have talked about doing this for a while, and I think we waited to the point where there are probably more podcasts out there than there are actually people to listen to them. So it feels like the perfect time to launch a podcast, right?
Funny. There's no shortage of podcasts, that's for sure. I don't know how you differentiate yourself, but we'll certainly try to put some nuggets in here for some folks looking for work.
Yeah, I think the goal is just going to be, how can this be super practical? And as the title suggests, just help people find a job. I guess maybe start there. You and I think, trade stories, and we both get a fair number of calls. It seems like it's pretty tough out there. So I'd love to hear just what your sense of the overall job market is and what you're hearing from people right now.
Yeah, I echo that. It is tough from people I'm talking to that are involved in the search. And then I was up in Tampa 2 weeks ago, meeting with a bunch of people that hire for a living, right? They run the human resources and the recruitment departments, and there is a lot of reluctance to pull the trigger right now. So things have definitely slowed down, at least from a messaging standpoint, which turns into behavior standpoint for people inside the HR departments. And unfortunately, the people that are looking for work are feeling it. And I guess another one. It's funny you mention or bring that up. I also have some personal experience with people that are actually sticking around and aren't willing to take chances right now to interview and look for new opportunities. So they're staying in jobs while they've got them longer, which I think, again, goes in line with what we're talking about and exacerbates the problem for those looking because they're not opening up. So I'm seeing that as well.
Yeah, it certainly bears out in the data. I don't think we've seen a lower quit rate in a long, long time. There's just not a lot of openings, not a lot of people moving. And it's particularly challenging for the new college grad, the person entering the job market, particularly in the professional field. So no wonder you and I are getting a fair number of calls. Why don't we back up a little bit and do some quick intros? I'm Andy Hilger. I've met Mike about 25 years ago. He and I worked at a company called Hilger Group, which is the largest recruiting company in North America, one of the largest in the world. And I had the real honor of meeting people like Mike, building a company with a lot of amazing people and standing on the shoulders of a lot of amazing people who had really laid the foundation. And then ultimately what we did is in a good week, we'd help about 10,000 people start a new job every Monday morning. So super fulfilling work. I spent my last 6 years as president of the organization and really advocating for the great work the different operating companies did. And now I'm in the next chapter of my life and really trying to help the next generation figure out how they can navigate their career successfully. So with that, I'd love to introduce you to Mike McSally.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. And not my strength here, speaking about myself, but long story short, I got into the recruitment business accidentally in 1990 and really had never heard of it, didn't know much about it, but I had met with some incredibly convincing and charismatic founders of Hilger Group and decided that I should pack up and move to Baltimore. And along the way, I think my biggest takeaway was that recruitment was broken when I entered it in 1990. And I think it's broken, still today. And despite the efforts of really good people, really smart people trying to arm the world with technology, I think right now technology is exacerbating the very problem that we've experienced in recruitment. So I'm sure you and I can tee that up a little bit. Not that technology can't be an enabler and a helper, but there seems to be an over-reliance on it. I mean, it's like it just sucks you in. That's where people spend the majority of their time. I think even a survey you did says, 80% of time, effort, and energy is spent online, yet it yields only 19% of job opportunities. So anyway, Andy, had a really enjoyable career helping people with just challenging conventional wisdom with the way they went about looking for their next opportunity inside the organization they were with, or opportunities outside the organization, or trying to get their foot into a company they had interest in.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. 35 years and you haven't fixed this thing yet. Kind
Yeah.
of hard to fathom. But hey, in all seriousness, for listeners and viewers, I think I will often say Mike's forgotten more about recruiting than I know, and I think what's made him probably the best recruiter and the most knowledgeable recruiter from my perspective is he's incredibly firm in his conviction about the right way to do things, but he's also open as technology's evolved, as the world's changed. I think Mike's one of the few people who's able to stay open and think differently, but go back to core principles. And I think we'll spend a lot of time talking about that today, but that's really a lot of the impetus for why I had suggested, hey, Mike, I direct, I don't know how many people to you a year. That's not a scalable model. Maybe we can record something and this can go out to a broader audience. Who knows? Maybe at some point there will be McSally GPT guiding people through their
Don't hold
recruiting
your
life.
breath.
But you started with technology maybe getting in the way. And I want to double click on that for a second. What I hear from a lot of the frustrated job seekers, particularly those who are newer in their career, but not only, is, hey, I can't get past the technology, or I'm spending all my day refining my resume, crafting cover letters, responding to job postings. And to your point, it feels like what's supposed to be taking friction out of the process is actually gumming it up. So I'd love to hear your take on maybe how people ought to think differently about their job search and not rely so much on job postings and responding.
Yeah, Andy, and that certainly is your expertise right now on the AI introduction into everything we do in our lives. But you've written a couple articles that talk about chat bots are now talking to chat bots in this process, right? Because a guy like me, if I was unemployed, I would use ChatGPT to write my resume. So the chat bot's doing the job for me. Whether it's accurate or not, I know it's easy and it looks great, and I sound really qualified when I type that into ChatGPT. And then I send it off to a job posting, and they've got technology on that end, using another chatbot to see if I'm even qualified. And now the kids, I think you wrote about, they're trying to trick they're trying to trick the chatbot. So Andy, my advice, I was thinking about getting on the call with you today, and it goes back to, I didn't realize it, but how the heck did I find my first career job? I found it in the caddy yard through a guy named Steve Franzen, who was working for, at the time, Aerotech, what became Allegis Group. And I had already accepted a job through a friend of my dad's. So my first two jobs out of college didn't require me to send a resume to a job posting, or back in the day, I guess it was the classifieds. Steve Franzen woke me up that Monday morning after 4th of July and said, hey, drive down to Parsippany, New Jersey, Mountain Lakes, New Jersey. And I did. And so then I fast forwarded a little bit. You mentioned 35 years. That's a tough pill to swallow, but I've got 4. Maddie McSally found her job that she's currently in through a connection. Jack McSally found his job at State Street up in Boston through a loose connection. Caitlin McSally found her internship through a loose connection. Did Jack have to formally apply to the job he's in? He did. And it was a broken process. It took him maybe 7 months to land that job. And I finally said, I'm done. You've got to take, you're turning down jobs to, as you're waiting for this company to give you an offer. So I'm sure the people at State Street will appreciate my glowing endorsement. But anyway, Jack landed that job because of a connection. So Andy, I always go back to what you and I remember being called a proven resource. And I think the research suggests even today, we're looking for reliability. We're looking for dependability. We're looking for people that, we can count on, that are going to come in and be open to taking feedback and learning. For the kids entering the workforce today, who knows about that? Well, it's college professors, it's older students that they took lab classes with, it's people they dog sat for, it's people they house sat and babysat for, it's the members at the community pool where they lifeguarded for 4 years. And so everything I talk about and sometimes write about encourages people to really look at who their loose connections are that would go to bat for them, that can open up those doors.
Yeah, so you said a lot there, and it's pretty cool that generationally it's how you found your job, and now how the next generation, your kids, are finding their jobs. You said loose connections a couple times, and I want to make sure people understand that, and just so I'm capturing the spirit of it. I think you're much more likely to find your job through a second connection on LinkedIn, second degree connection on LinkedIn, than a first degree, because a lot of the first degree, they know who you know,
That's
and
right.
part of your mission is to get out to people who are going to extend your network. So is that a fair way to describe loose connection?
That is the definition. The research, and I'm drawing a blank. I've got Cam Scattaboo on the brain. I know it was a psychologist or, that was doing the research with a similar last name. And he said, we don't often find our jobs through our first level, our most close connections, because we're swimming off the same pool. We know the same people. It's exactly what you said. It's a former colleague that you didn't know terribly well, or a kid that you went to college with 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 years ago, but you lost track with. So that's exactly right, Andy. The power of the second degree connection is what's really, really important. And why still I encourage people to leverage LinkedIn as best they can.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I think there's a general fear that people have. They may intellectually know, hey, I should be out on LinkedIn, but they feel busy by replying to job postings. And there's a level of concern or fear that if I don't know that person really well, can I really reach out to them? Or I'm 22 and I'm just starting out. I don't really have that network developed, and or even a sense of, I want to do this by myself. So I don't want to leverage, my parents' networks,
Yeah.
or I don't have parents who are in the professional world. So, knowing that those are some of the hurdles that people face, how do you coach them to kind of get past that, if you will?
Yeah, Andy, I think I would, maybe I'll work backwards. It's like, I don't want to use my parents' network. Well, we got to get over that as soon as we possibly can. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I did land my first job offer out of school through my dad's network. At the end of the day, I ended up at Allegiance Group because my mom and dad were members at the same country club as Steve Franzen's mom and dad were. So I think if we all look back at 57 or 50 or 46 or whatever it is, most of us got some help along the way. Not that the road was paved for us in getting jobs for us, but we got some help along the way. And this generation, I have seen, is more than willing to help. Not all of them know how to help because they're not professional networkers, and we can do some things to help them along the way with that. So I would say, just like dating, I don't know, I think the chance of succeeding is a lot higher if a sorority sister introduces you and speaks on your behalf than you going up, at a bar. But I don't have the research to prove that, Andy, but I think it's super important to leverage the network. You mentioned LinkedIn. It's okay that you don't know people. My experience, 35 years. So it's not what I believe. What I've experienced and witnessed is, if you approach people in a very transparent, humble way with a very clear objective, most times those people are willing to help you out. When you have a mutual connection, it increases it even more. So I think, just like we would do research on any topic, or if we were in sales, we would research the client, the territory. The same thing applies for the job search. And that's what I have seen. Until I learned differently, as recent as this summer, I know, 6, 7, 8 people have landed their jobs because they reached out to former people in their network. So I'm going to continue to go down that road and coach people how to do it professionally and politely, that are going to yield the outcomes they're looking for.
Yeah, so really, really well said. And I can speak for me. I get a lot of requests on LinkedIn for people to talk to me, to connect for whatever the reason. And I can tell you who I don't reply to. It's the people who haven't done their homework and are super salesy. But generally, if it's somebody who, as you suggest, is humbly asking for help, I'm going to respond. And odds are I'm going to respond really quickly if they attach a name of somebody that I know and trust. If it says, hey, Mike McSally suggested that I reach out, I'm trying to figure out how to do X, that's somebody I'm going to have time for. And I'm going to make sure I do what I can, because both I want to help him, but I also want Mike to know that I value his friendship. And if he put his name on this person, I'm going to go forward. So I think, that's really important. I want to back up and maybe go a little bit deeper into the connections, because you rattled off, you were the lifeguard at the pool. You were, I think there are lots of amazing people whose parents don't really have the network. They might just not come from that professional background. You and I know a lot of them from some of the work we've done in Baltimore. But I think sometimes people don't recognize the network that they do have. And I think you've always done a really good job of helping people understand that they know more people than they know. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, and how you can take somebody who says, hey, I don't know anybody, and suddenly they've got 40 or 50 names to call.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andy. You know, my two favorite questions when I'm calling somebody myself personally, when I need some help getting introduced or I'm looking to hire somebody, the first thing, now these are people that have been in the work world, I ask is, if you were given the authority and had the budget to hire two of the best, and you can insert any skill set you want, project manager, salesperson, lifeguard, whatever it is. If you were to hire, based on their background, who would those two people be? Who would you bring onto your team knowing they would do a great job with you? Now, again, obviously, if I'm looking for lifeguards, I'm talking to people that have spent time in that profession. So very rarely, like if you just asked me off the cuff, McSally, who were the two best second basemen you ever, you played baseball with? I would know, and I could get you to those people. The second question I always asked, Andy, was, hey, if you think back to a time when you worked at insert company, who were the people you relied on the most? Who did you know was always going to get it done? And all of a sudden, I call it, Andy, trying to help people with their amnesia. If you ask really generic questions like, do you know anyone? It's like, no. I'm going to use a silly analogy, whether you cut it or not, I don't know. Again, it's dating. Hey, do you know any good single guys? Nah, I don't know any good single guys. Well, hey, could we go onto your Facebook page and could we see? Like, that changes everything. You help them all of a sudden organize their network, and you ask very specific or direct questions. And I did the same thing in trying to help people realize who they've interacted with, who they've networked with, and who they potentially could have a very meaningful conversation with that'll open up the door for them. So those are the two questions that I typically ask. And then from there, we just drill down. Hey, when I get them on the phone, Mike, what should I ask them, et cetera? And I'm sure you and I can chat about that as well. But again, not to get repetitive, but if I was calling you, I pulled up your LinkedIn profile and I said, hey, Andy, when you were in this role at this organization, who were the two best people, most reliable people that were just tremendous at their job that you worked with? And then I said, Andy, if today you were given a budget, who would you pull onto your team with that type of background? That usually gets us thinking a little bit. And you hear, oh gosh, I haven't thought about that guy in years. Andy, I also think it's important when I'm doing that to have the person's LinkedIn profile up in front of me, because then I can help them again with, hey, I see over here, at your organization, it also shows me a profile of this person. What do you know about them? Oh, what about this person? Hey, Andy, I went all the way down to the recommendations that you've been given or endorsements that you've been given in this skill set. Can I read you a couple of those names? And all of a sudden, the conversation gets really deep, and typically you zero in on 4 or 5 people that the person you're speaking with is willing to help you connect with. So a little long-winded there, pal. Sorry, but I hope that answered the question you were teeing up for me.
Yeah, super helpful. And I think those 4 or 5 people, at least in my experience, love to hear that somebody is telling them that they were an amazing advocate for them and that they really enjoyed working with them. And so you've got a fairly warm introduction at that point. If you can then reach out to them and say, hey, so and so was singing your praises and suggested that I give you a call. So I think that's really good advice. If we back up again a little bit and get over sort of that initial reluctance of hitting send on the email or the text or the, whatever, what's usually that initial call like with the person you maybe haven't talked to in a couple years, but you knew them a little bit from the pool when you were the lifeguard and you want to reach out? How do you coach them to just have a fairly simple conversation or note that's going to get them to say, yeah, I'd spend 15 minutes with you?
Yeah, really good, Andy. My answer is always, and it's emphatic, you have to make an emotional connection with that person very early on in the conversation. And what I do and what I coach or recommend people on is there is no one that we speak with that has not been stuck in a really bad job or that has had trouble getting in front of gatekeepers or decision makers that they want to. And I just talk about that, or I encourage people to talk about that. Right now, the average position is receiving upwards of 200 resumes. The average person that is looking at those resumes spends between 6 and 60 seconds looking at them. It's a futile exercise. It's what conventional wisdom tells us we need to do, but it yields really bad outcomes. And then I would ask them to ask the person, have you been through an experience where, you were looking for a job or you were trying to get a promotion or you were trying to get in a meeting with somebody that you couldn't? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yes, that's happened to me. I can relate. And when you have that person on the other end of the phone say, I can relate, my experiences, you've got a really good, connection where they're going to empathize with what you're going through, and they're going to spend those 14 minutes, remaining on the call to really help you out. And, you and I think we have data points, you probably more than me, but I just look at some of the stuff that I share with people. Over 80% of meetings that are being set up in today's B2B world are set up by somebody other than the person trying to get the meeting. So I throw those little nuggets in there. I know you know this. I'm really big on setting context. I call it landscape process with them. And the big L is context, context, context. That's the emotional connection. That's what I'm going through. I sent 100 resumes out. I can't get a response. I get these automated dings, blah, blah, blah. Then I throw in a little bit more, data or research. The ask is simple. It's like, hey, I believe if you get me in front of these people, it may not lead to a job offer, but it's going to keep momentum going and help me. And then I go from there. I don't lead with, hey, I need a job really badly and I need you to introduce me to somebody. So again, I make that emotional connection. I try to get the guy or gal, or I coach the folks I'm talking to. We've all been through it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would say that I find is the people who are really hesitant to do that initial outreach don't always appreciate that the stakes are really low. The reality is, if I get 10 emails today and I'm not able to get back to everyone, I don't think less of anyone who reached out to me. In fact, I probably have forgotten them by tomorrow.
Yep.
And so you have very little to lose. And like I said, if it's a warm introduction from somebody, I'm going to prioritize that on top. So if you can sort of find that point of connection. And I love your idea of what is the emotional connection. If there's some level of appeal, that's also going to push you to the top. But the stakes are pretty low. So for those out there listening, you got to get past your fear.
Really well
said. You're going to be much more successful taking some swings than just continuing to play the game of, yeah, but I've applied to 3,000 jobs and I haven't gotten any. It's amazing. You and I have both published some stuff on LinkedIn, and one of the responses that I get when I say you've got to be more human and you've got to connect with people is, well, how can I do that if I can't even get them to reply to my job posting response or look at my resume? And I think, all right, we got to back up because you're playing a game that is already broken. We've got to think differently about this. So I'm going to keep doing this, but I even want to back you up again. One of the other challenges that I think we have is some of the people have a really clear picture of what they want. Hey, I want to work in financial services. I want to get into, a sales role or a business development role. And, I love wealth management. other people just need a job, and I think those people tend to cast such a wide net that sometimes it's hard for them to figure out, like, where do I even start?
Yeah.
I can come up with a list of names. So I'm curious what advice you have for that person who really doesn't know and is sort of almost spraying and praying when it comes to the playing the job posting game.
Yeah. A quick story comes to mind that just took place last week, and no surprise to you, it took place on the golf course. So I meet a gentleman that I played a bunch of rounds with, and he said, "Hey, I got a guest showing up. Do you want to play?" And I said, "Sure." And we meet. And, third hole, we mentioned, Maryland, really? Yeah, I spent some time in Maryland. Oh, really? Okay, cool. Fourth hole, "Oh, what were you doing in Maryland?" "Oh, I worked at a place called Caves Valley." I said, "Oh, interesting. Hey, what years did you work at Caves Valley?" And he goes, 94 and blah, blah. I said, "A very dear friend of mine worked at Caves Valley in those time frames." He goes, "Really? Who was that?" And I said, "Jared Rosado." And he goes, "You know Jared?" So we take a picture of me and my new friend and we snap it to Jared, and we get back, "The big cat, how's he doing?" Well, anyway, the big cat pulled in a Range Rover to the parking lot, and the big cat was doing really, really well in life. And the story here, Andy, is this. He was an assistant pro at a golf course, and he said to the CEO of a very, very large insurance company, "I can't do this the rest of my life. I'm not making any money." And the CEO of a very large insurance company said, "You need to come to work for me in Hartford, Connecticut." And so what that told me was that he was on time, he was polite, he was good at instructing people on golf. And this CEO saw enough about who he was and the character he had that said, "Hey, come to Hartford with me." He spun off on his own, and now he has a very niche company where they insure ski resorts. And I said, "Boy, that's pretty niche." Ironically, his buddy, Jared Rosado, who was working at the golf course, a member from Caves pulled him out and introduced him to the insurance business. So, I share that story, Andy, for the reason is I'm 57 and I don't know what I want to do for a living. But I think our job is to show some core values and some character of the makeup of who we are and what we're willing to do for the men and women we work for at that time. And that genuinely opens up doors that we didn't know even existed. So that's always been the way. I started caddying. I had no idea I was going to get offered to work in the bag room, which then led me to so many things. The first job offer I got out of school was because I was a good caddy and I hustled and I was polite and I said, "Yes, sir. No, sir. Thank you, sir." And, so I think all those things are super important. Getting your foot in the door, meeting a completely different network that you wouldn't have otherwise, and proving yourself is the most important thing you can possibly do when you're starting out.
Yeah, what great advice, and what a cool story. I mean, such a great story for the guy who went on to found the little niche insurance business, but pretty cool of that CEO to see that in him and say, "Hey, there are some portable, transferable skills that you don't always see. I can teach him insurance, but
That's
this
right.
guy is going to be great." As a side note, while we're on the theme of weak connections, I'm not sure if you remember this, but Jared Rosado and I actually went to high school together. I have not seen him since probably 1987, but it
I
is a small, small world.
that's tremendous, and I appreciate you reminding me of that because I would not have remembered until you just told me. But yeah, Philadelphia, right? I forget Upper Marion, Lower Marion, one of those places, right? I don't know, where was it?
Yeah, Episcopal Academy.
There you go,
So he was
Pisco
he
Academy.
was
Okay,
a little younger than I, but pretty wild. I had not heard that name in a long, long time.
funny.
And I love your overarching message there. I don't know how many people we hired over the years who just fit that profile. They showed up the right way, worked really hard, were committed to building something great, wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves, and somehow, some way, somebody saw them waiting tables or parking cars and said, "This is somebody who I think we'd want on the team with us." And you can build a pretty amazing business if you get the right character in the room. To your point, that character lives everywhere. And I would say, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I would say I had somebody I talked to a while ago who was struggling to find a job. He had just graduated from university, and he had been out maybe 4 months. And he said, gosh, if I don't find something soon, I'm going to have to go back to the restaurant where I've worked the last 5 summers. And I just said, hey, you know what? This call's done. Go back to the restaurant, go get that job, work your ass off for a while, and call me then. Not only are you going to have probably more opportunity to meet people and demonstrate skills, but you're going to have a much better story in an interview than I've been playing games in the basement for the last 5 months and really working hard to, apply to a lot of jobs. If you're saying, hey, I'm taking this course on LinkedIn, I'm showing up at the restaurant 4 nights a week, and I'm on this job search. Sometimes the best way to get a job is to go get a job. That's
I
the
think
advice I'd have.
Andy, it's great. It's great. Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of job offers, sitting on mom and dad's couch, right? No, unless someone's knocking on the door asking if anybody's unemployed at home. So really well said. I think, elbow grease, hustle is, gosh, it is what everybody looks for innately when they're looking to hire people. The fact that so many people have been pulled out of restaurants and caddy yards or, lifeguarding, et cetera, and have gone on to have wonderful careers that they otherwise, wouldn't have had if they weren't exhibiting those skills that they didn't know people were watching.
Great stuff, Mike. Really, really helpful. Tell you what, let's pause there and we'll come back in part 2 and dive much deeper into the how. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to How to Find a Job Part 1. Be sure to check out Part 2. And best of luck finding the opportunity that gives you a chance to work with great people, grow your skills, and make a difference.